My name is Kiley Baker. I sit in the private bank. I actually lead our team locally who works with founders and entrepreneurs who have built really amazing companies and exited them. We work with them for all of their personal wealth management needs. And when Alex thought it might make sense for me to moderate this panel, it made a lot of sense, just in the sense that every client that I have, as I listen to them and their origin stories and how they went about building their businesses, one of the most common themes and threads that I hear is resilience and times that they've had to pivot or times that their company almost failed. And so I don't know how you have a conference on conscious entrepreneurship without talking about this topic. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm joined by two awesome people that I have already come to love in the very short period of time that we've gotten to know each other. Lizelle Van Vuuren, sitting immediately to my right, and James Oliver. Lizelle is local in Colorado, and I think that you probably know quite a few people in this room for all the great work that you've done. As an entrepreneur, she's been in tech for 18 years. She's been building companies for more than a decade. She's well known in this community for starting Women Who Start Up, and right now is working on her next move, but also working part-time as a venture partner with a New York City-based shop. And James has joined us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. James and I found out we share an alma mater, UNC Chapel Hill. Go Heels.
Go to hell, Duke.
Gotta put that out there. James is a 3-time founder. He is the father of twins. I learned about him that he's the creator of a really cool foundation called the Parent Entrepreneur Foundation. It's really hard to say for me, I'm sorry.
Parentpreneur Foundation. It's hard for me to spell it half the time.
Thank you. All about helping Black entrepreneurs leave really awesome legacies for their beautiful Black children. James also has a really awesome podcast called Parents Making Profits, which I've listened to a couple of his sessions, and they're really good. So yeah, thanks for being here today, guys. Anything else you'd add?
No, let's just get into it.
Oh, you forgot my current startup situation.
Yeah, how did I forget that? And James also just recently finished Techstars in Austin. He started a company called Kabila that's focused on matching co-founders with each other, as I understand it.
It's a co-founder matching app. Think Bumble for co-founders.
But better.
Way better.
Way better.
Way better, of course, without a doubt. And you also just recently wound down your first startup. So I think we want to hear from you a little bit on that today. Yeah. Cool. Well, pivoting and thinking a little bit about this concept of resilience, when we first started talking and preparing for this panel, one of the first questions that I asked you both is, why do you guys think Alex wanted you to be on this panel? And I will say it became obvious very quickly because of the outpouring of stories that you both had. And you've both had pretty amazing careers, a lot of success along the way, some failures as well, perceived failures. I know that we all define that differently. But would love to just hear from you, what does this concept of resilience mean to you guys? How do you define it in your entrepreneurial path? I think it'll be helpful to the audience to hear from you on that, just in terms of setting the stage and laying the groundwork for this conversation.
Sure. Awesome. You want me to go? I'll go. Hi, everybody. I'm Lizelle. Thank you so much, Kiley. So resilience is interesting. When we were talking about this conversation as we warmed this up in a small group, and I wish Derek was here too, I mentioned that when I think about resilience, I think about resilience as an outcome, not as a root anything. I think about endurance as an entrepreneur every single day, as a human being every single day, you're enduring some shit. And I think when James and myself and Derek and Kiley were talking about like resilience in the essence of how do you define that, listen, we are two people here trying to represent what, 1,000,001 entrepreneurs? Impossible. But what I can share with you, and I've had millions of failures, right? Like, I could write a book on failure. I think failure is so synonymous with trying crazy things, trying to become more than you are in the journey of being a founder, being a serial founder, building companies, building beyond yourself. All that to say is, I think resilience comes kind of like a bicep. What can you endure to strengthen that bicep defines how resilient you are. What I also came to share with Kiley and James and Derek on our preparation call was, I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs show up at the starting line of entrepreneurship with plenty in the tank of what you have endured in life and why you would choose something as audacious as building a company or building a project or building a product, building anything beyond yourself, really. I actually went as far as to mention, this is some of my own personal lived experience, but I think a lot of human beings who have the privilege to build a company or to be a founder or to be an entrepreneur show up at that role so organically, not everyone, but many of us, and I've spoken to thousands of people who have similar stories as founders and entrepreneurs, that you've already endured all sorts of things, whether that was from childhood, whether that was trauma, or didn't have to be some, drastic kind of scar or scarring or muscle making in your life. But I think a lot of us do have a lot of that in common. I could be wrong. Again, I'm not trying to stereotype or generalize with respect. But I do think for many, thousands of entrepreneurs that I talk to and that I write about and that I research, is that at the point that we actually show up to build a company, we have endured some shit. And actually, the thing that makes the most sense is that we would take a lot of that energy and a lot of that pent-up focus, and we would do something with that. We would build something. We would build something beyond ourselves. We would push ourselves. We would go beyond our limits. We would go and do something meaningful that hopefully generates money, creates impact, and kind of leaves it a little bit better than you found it. Again, all that to say is, in my opinion, resilience is an outcome. Much like when you walk into the gym for the very first time and your muscles are kind of weak, you got to buffer them up. It's what you can endure that really sustains or generates a sense of resilience in life and definitely in entrepreneurship. But that's just my 2 cents.
I love that. Endurance or resilience as an outcome. Thank you. James, what about you? What's your perspective?
I actually agree with you in terms of it's a muscle, right? So I have 10-year-old boy-girl twins. If anybody follows me on Twitter, I'm always #TwinNado, and I put like 2 tornado emojis. But, I didn't grow up, stereotypically whatever, but I didn't grow up in the best neighborhood, and I had to endure and overcome a lot. And I think that's a large part of why I fancy myself as in the 99th percentile of persistent and resilient people on the planet. I don't know if that's necessarily a great thing, but it is what it is. But my children, who are growing up very privileged compared to how I grew up, it was a couple of months I had them. So I'm a single dad, it's a divorce. Recently engaged, though, taking the plunge again.
Congrats.
Thank you. I told them my kids were doing something. I looked at them, I said, "You guys are soft." "That's not nice, Daddy." I said, "But it's true." I just want to take them in the woods or something, take away the tablets and the Nintendo Switch, and let's go figure some stuff out. The first little bit of resistance that comes in their path, they're just melting. I'm like, whose kids are these? These ain't my kids. But anyway, we're gonna work on that. It's true. They're soft. But so I'm wearing my "Get You a Therapist" T-shirt. So my Parentpreneur Foundation is a wonderful woman, Dr. Charmaine Jackman. she sent me this T-shirt. She's in the mental health space. Her company's called InnoPsych. And so I was talking to one of my therapists, and she asked me, like, why do you go so hard? And I didn't know, right? But then we started talking, and I realized it's any black people in here growing up had parents tell them, you got to be twice as good to be considered equal. There's one. Anybody else? Yeah, basically all the black people, or Andrea, right? Right? And, it's true, but it's also a massive burden. And I think there's a toxicity in, like, embracing that. I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'll try to bring it back together. It is, because the reality is you can be twice and thrice as good and still not be accepted. It's like Clarence said earlier today. Was it Clarence that said, 77% of the money went to, cisgender white males, and he's like, there's no way in hell that they're 77% better than me, right? So it doesn't even matter. So, like, it doesn't matter how you show up. People are still not necessarily going to perceive you as equal. So I personally have decided to, like, I don't give a crap, right? I'm just going to be me. Like, I have, just be yourself. Don't be an asshole, right? Got no asshole rule. Give first. That's the Techstars thing. It's so true. And just don't worry about it. So that's kind of where I am. But part of the reason I am as resilient as I am is because of how I grew up. I had breakfast this morning with a really good friend and mentor and sponsor. I'm not going to name drop, but he's kind of a big deal in Boulder. He sponsored my Parentpreneur Foundation, continues to sponsor it, gave us the seed funding to kick it off. And I told him I was going to be on this panel. And he said, James, you're resilient as fuck. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I don't want to have to be so resilient. I want to just, like, coast. I want the privilege of being able to coast. So anyway, I'm done. I don't know if I answered your question. And it is a
privilege, right? I mean, I hear you on that. And just Penny, for your thoughts, you describe your kids, James, as being soft, and I have an almost 2-year-old and a 4-month-old, and I'm terrified of that. And when I told my husband that I was doing this panel, he's like, "Oh, well, that's great for you. You grew up in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, and you've done pretty well for yourself." And, like, do you think that being resilient is something that's innate? Is it something that you learn? What's your perspective on that? Like, how do you build that muscle?
Yeah, I think it's like what you said. You go through experiences. Like, I grew up poor. My parents got divorced, and it got really hard for us. So I wrote a book called The More You Hustle, the Luckier You Get. You Can Be a Successful Parentpreneur. And I wrote that book to inspire the millions of parentpreneurs around the world to be the best parent and entrepreneur they could be. But so in the book, I talk about growing up. I can remember, I just had 2 pairs of jeans, and kids used to tease me, right? And we used to get that, that thick-ass government, I call it government, that thick-ass government cheese. Anybody know about that thick-ass government cheese? Right? Anybody know about that? Any white folks know about the thick-ass government cheese? No, congratulations. That's really good. That's so good for you. But you're like, we were on Medicaid, right? It was hard. Making bologna sandwiches, right? Living on a block where at least once a summer somebody got shot. It was hard. So I had to, like, be resilient. First person, well, actually the second person, my aunt who recently passed away, she was the first person, my mother's sister. She graduated from college, and she was the first black woman in management at IBM in the electric typewriter division.
Wow.
I remember that. I was a kid playing on a typewriter, right? But to answer your question is, I think it's a muscle. You can learn to be resilient. I think some of it is your attitude or perspective on failure. I know we're going back and forth about this, and you saw something I said in my podcast, which was, it's okay to fail. Like she said, I just turned off the servers on my first startup that I started back in 2013. I was in generator accelerator. We're second class, second cohort. Started that thing. That thing has failed, and I restarted it so many times. That's why those questions you were asking about when you burnt something, I know you didn't mean that literally, right? First startup burned. What did I do? I tried to fix it, right? Tried to restart it. Tried to keep going, but eventually it collapsed under its own weight. So yeah, it failed. Test. The startup failed, but it's a short walk from it failed or I failed to I'm a failure. And once you walk to that I'm a failure spot, man, that's a terrible place to be. So I think it's very important to have good conversations about trying and fail. Like I see that in my kids when something goes wrong, they just like, oh, I'm like, it's okay, right? We're just experimenting, right? What do we learn from that? Like, how can we make it better, right? It's okay if things don't go the way you want all the time. That's welcome to life, right? But it's not okay to call yourself a failure. Like that is for your sake of your mental well-being. That's just a terrible thing to say about yourself, I think.
Yeah. And what's your perspective on resilience, innate versus learned?
Whew. I mean, James just like unpacked like a lot of lived experiences, which we've had very different learned experiences and life experiences. I guess I'll put it this way in closing of this, like opening question, which is, I almost wish we didn't have to, James hinted at this and I will kind of amplify. It's like, I love that your kids are soft. God, wouldn't that be nice if we just had a world of a little bit softer than so bloody hard, right? There's like a tremendous amount of hardness, and I feel like living in this country is particularly interesting. I'm an immigrant. I think that builds resilience. I'm gay. I think that builds resilience. When you're rejected, for many, many breaths of your existence, in any capacity, it will build your bicep. You know what I'm talking about because you are a human being, right? So all of us have this in common. All of us face things that we have to endure. Women in the workplace, discrimination, men can't cry. James's existence of being a black man in America, we have become friends and we talk about this a lot, and I mostly listen and I mostly learn. And I can talk about things like being an immigrant, being gay, blah, blah, blah. But it builds a muscle. So when we show up in our worlds, we show up as those people. And it means that those are the lenses that we see the world through. So we will be more compassionate. So the more that we've endured, the more resilience that we have kind of put into our backpack, if you will. If you had an endurance backpack. Okay, everybody picture yourself with a backpack right now. And it's a lot of weight, isn't it? It's a lot of shit in a backpack. It's like brick on brick on brick, and you're carrying that stuff around. And so when we get, it could be a burden. And we have to make choices in life with some of this resilience and what we've endured to say, do we use this as fuel or do we let it crush our souls into oblivion? And I think because we're human, some days it does that 10 times over both ways. Some days we are absolutely crushed and some days we are killing it, or however, the kids say it these days. And I think for the most part, all of us are doing our damnedest to not be so crushed by all the shit that we carry around. And if we're brave enough and we are privileged enough, we can unpack some of that shit to make some room for a little bit more softness, abundance, joy, all the amazing things that I've spoken to many of you that I've already met today. So I suppose that's what I think about that.
That's great. Thank you. And building on that a little bit, how do you channel all of these experiences that you have? How do you turn them into fuel? How do you go about doing that?
Well, you don't have to. What did you say, Andrea? You have to. You have to. Yeah. I'll take this briefly, and then we can go to James. But what do we do with that?
Yeah, how?
How do we do it?
Who do you rely on? What are your resources?
Yeah, fascinating. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think much like what I mentioned, a couple of minutes ago, it's like, listen, like you get up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you've got a million choices that you could make, but there's two fundamental choices you're going to make. Am I a victim of, some of the stuff that I carry around every day? Or am I a human being with these lived experiences? And I'm saying this as who I am from my lived experience. And I have to learn about other people's lived experiences. It's not a generalization. I'm not trying to put this onto someone else. But I think of if you get up in the morning and it feels kind of like, wow, this is a lot. This is just, maybe this is even too much or whatever. This is a lot. Everything in this backpack could be a lot. I think you have to find room. You have to get some of that baggage out of the way, whether that be through friendship, through therapy, through coaching, through mentorship. I think one of the most innate things that you would have find me do is start a lot of companies. And if I look back for the first time on the last 18 years of my career, and most certainly the last 12 years of my life building companies, I, for the first time, not that I was unaware of this or oblivious to this, but I can really, honestly, with courage, say and look at myself in the mirror and go, your work has been a massive coping mechanism of a lifetime of trauma that you haven't unpacked, and you have to deal with that. Why? I want to make some room for more abundance. It's just, that's also a privileged place to be. For a lot of us, there's a lived experience. This is not that easy. No matter how much you try and take the burdens off of how the world treats you or looks at you or perceives you or things that you are fundable or not fundable, right? It's kind of exhausting to get up every day and remind yourself that you are a part of 2% of all venture capital. It gets really, really dauntingly boring. And so what do? I build shit. I build shit to try and change that. Why did I become the founder of Women Who Start Up? So that I could change that. I needed to bring thousands of people into a room to believe in women who could build anything. Women are capable of anything. So why wouldn't I want to become a magnet for that? I did. But it was selfish at first because I wanted to learn from other women and how they're building their companies with everybody, with all of us, with all of you, right? And so you can make two choices. You can make a million choices, but you can make two fundamental choices. And one is to take an action and one is to not take an action. And what's interesting about Nick's nothing this morning is sometimes you actually do just need to perceive the world as it is. Because for the first time in my life, when I'm sitting and just kind of looking at how hard I have worked, it's paid off. I can teach a lot of things to other people. I can attribute that to the next thing that I want to build and might build, should build. I should build a lot of other shit. It's too exciting not to. But not because I want to fill my time avoiding pain or suffering or the things I've had to endure or not feeling like I'm good enough or feeling like I'm not as good as anybody else in this room, but because I want to. Because I want to. God forbid I do something that I want to, that makes me happy, right? I don't even know if I just answered the question, but who cares? That was interesting.
It's all good.
It was a great answer.
I like it.
It was a great answer.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So, going back to what I talked about, this kind of blessing curse thing. I have a chip on my shoulder, all right? I'm an overlooked founder. You talk about getting 2% for women. I think in Q1 of 2023, black male founders got 0.63% of VC funding. I think the chip I think it's okay to have a little edge, but the problem is, so I, I spun up a couple of sessions with my therapist because, get you a therapist, right? I spun up a couple of sessions to try to understand, why do I care? If I had this thing like, if I feel like disrespected or overlooked or slighted or chumped off, as I like to call it, I get my feelings about that shit, all right? But I don't want to. I don't want to care, but I do. So I was like, yo, we need to talk about this. Like, why is that? All right, so we had some good conversations, and she gave me some frames of reference and some tools, and I'm doing better, because right after that, I had a conversation with a VC. You probably know, you're probably following his punk ass on Twitter. So
Probably.
the performative nature of it all. But I had a meeting with this dude. It was a 30-minute call. Like, he sent me the calendar. Yo, we can talk today. 30 minutes. He's like, how should I reach you? Here's my cell. I sent it to him. He shows up 15 minutes late for a 30-minute call to talk about he had something important to talk to his wife about. I'm like, I didn't react. Anyway, long story short is, I did better with that. I didn't get upset about it. I recognized it, and I was like, yo, that's on him. He could have texted me. So I responded better in that situation. So I feel like the work with the therapist is working. But the chip on the shoulder thing is a thing. It is a little bit of a burden, I think. So,
But one of my favorite quotes is, chips on shoulders put chips in pockets. So remember that next time.
No, I think a little edge is a good thing, right? Just have to keep a little bit of an edge, because people don't mess with you, then you got a little edge, right? Better not mess with her. So anyway.
That's great. Well, let me just kind of rewinding a little bit. James, you shared with us that you recently wound down your first startup. Can you talk a little bit more for the audience about what that process was like? How did you decide to do it? Like, how did you bounce back from that to go start another company?
I'll tell you a funny story. How much time do we have? We're going on time? So it's a funny story. So how much time was that sign up there? 10 minutes. All right, cool. So this thing has been like on and off since forever. We ran out of money the first time. I had a primary investor look. Raise your hand if you had an investor to your face tell you, I'm not going to throw good money after bad. Anybody ever had that happen before? That was a terrible feeling, right? Yeah, I felt bad. So anyway, but yeah, he said that, but then came back a year later and he said, we like your leadership. Here's another $100,000. I'm like, great, but it's too late. Everybody quit. But okay, I'll take the money because I got to feed my kids. And I'm going to still try to make it work, right? Because it burnt, but I was still trying to fix it. That's just what I do. So anyway, so my startup failed, my mental health failed, ultimately my marriage failed. While I was married, the website was collapsing under its own weight, and I got this email out the blue from this guy named Seth Godin. Said, hey, your website's broken, with a screenshot and an arrow pointing at this thing. So what it was We Montage. It was the world's only website that lets you turn your digital images into removable photo wallpaper. Brilliant products. Was brilliant then, still brilliant. But the website's off now. I'm like, this cannot be Seth Godin. Everybody knows who Seth Godin is, right? Yeah. I'm like, God, you have a terrific sense of humor, because 2 months ago it was working just fine, right? So I looked it up. I'm like trying to make sure this email, so I figured out, I'm like, holy shit, this is actually Seth Godin. So I emailed him back. I'm like, hey, having some issues. He said, all right, well, can't wait to see what you come up with next. So anyway, so another short story here to piggyback on that. So after COVID, during COVID, when I started the Parapreneur Foundation, I actually remembered that he told me that. So I sent him an email. This is resilience, right? I say, hey, Seth, remember this email I got from you? You want to know what I started next? I just started this foundation for Black parents who are entrepreneurs, and Brad Feld gave us $50,000 seed grant to start it. He emailed me right back. He's like, oh, Brad's a terrific friend. Want to hop on a Zoom and see how I can help? I'm like, fuck yeah. I was on a Zoom with him like 30 minutes later, and he's been like a tremendous resource for my foundation community. giving scholarships to people in my Parapreneur Foundation community, to his marketing workshops. Been just really amazing. But so anyway, the website's been on again, off again for a long time, and I just decided to turn it off because it's just time. You know what I mean? I'm tired. It's time. So being resilient and persistent is a blessing and a curse. Sometimes you just don't know when to quit. So like I should have quit that thing a long time ago, but then I called my investors and I apologized, almost teary-eyed, and I'm so sorry this didn't work out. Part of the reason I grinded so hard is because I wanted to at least give you your money back, best case with some ROI, but a minimum wanted to give you your money back. And they were like, it's cool, it's all in the game. We appreciate how hard you worked. We don't think it was your fault at all. And he was like, well, what are you working on now? I'm like, oh, funny you should ask.
That's great. And tell us a little bit too about I want to be mindful of time, but your experience with Techstars, and you shared with me that like pretty early on, you've already kind of re-underwritten your thesis on your next venture. How did that go?
Yeah, so we got into Techstars last fall, and we were working on our MVP, the co-founder matching app, and we were advised, hey, you're making a lot of assumptions here that you haven't validated, to spend the whole time talking to customers. So I'm like, all right, cool. So we stopped building. It was 3 of us traveling back and forth to Austin, paying ourselves a little money. So we burned through that money fast, right? And so then we finished Techstars. While we're in Techstars, the entire fundraising landscape shifts. Nobody's funding pre-product, pre-revenue startups, at least not people look like me, right? That's not what's happening out in these startup streets. And so we're pre-product, pre-revenue. We're almost out of money. We got $25,000 from Angels, which was great. And it's November. Any investors in the room? Any investors? Are you talking to founders and writing checks in November and December?
No, not last year.
Yeah, but you ain't writing no checks though, right? Right, exactly. My point. Terrible time to be fundraising during the holidays. So we ran out of money, and we're like, the story we're telling, that dog ain't gonna hunt, right? I gotta come up with a new dog, new story to tell. So thankfully, I got some really good people who leaned in, some really senior people at Techstars, leaned in, helped me revise our business model, co-create the pitch deck with me. So now we're going out and telling a new story. And, I'm not gonna say, so part of this mindset thing is like I'm reframing how I talk about things, because it's like what you appreciate or spend your time and energy on, it appreciates. So I'm just being mindful about how I talk about things. So I'm not really sure how I want to say what's going on, but I'll just say that before John Hill left, I'm very good friends with John Hill. As he asked me the same question, how's it going? I was like, well, John, I have this new perspective. It's going great, right? And we have what we need. And I said, even though I look at my bank account for the business, and we only got $700 in the bank, right? We have what we need. How do I know? Because I always have what I need. So ultimately, I'm leaning hard into my faith right now, right? My faith, my therapist, riding my bike. If I don't want to do it, damn it, I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not pushing myself to these extremes. That's why when you asked if I was 1 to 8 on the burnout, I said, I think I'm a 5. But I said, I probably am actually a 6 or 7 because I've been going so fucking hard. I don't even know that I might be burnt out, right? But I don't do things that I don't want to do anymore.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Lizelle has a really great newsletter that she writes called Moonshots with Lizelle. And you write a lot and pontificate on mental health and founders. Tell us more about that and how you see people take good care of themselves.
I do write a lot about this, not enough apparently. I think one day maybe I'd love to write a book about the entrepreneur's journey and a collection. Just there's so many stories that I think encourage our actions. Yeah, I know, you'll be in it, for sure. Done, you saw it all go down. It wasn't a handshake, it was better. It was a fist bump. What do I write about? So what's interesting is I'll I'll end on this. I kind of think about entrepreneurship as training like an athlete. Who of you are athletic? Raise your hand. Feel free. Right. I mean, this is Boulder, so you're lying. So everybody should be raising their hands. Let me put it this way. I think of entrepreneurship as training like an athlete. It bears repeating. When I was building my first company, I didn't really know what I was doing. That's what we do. Like, you start things that you've never done before, and you do it anyway. This is how we learn. This is how you ride your bike. And then you fall, and then you have some scrapes and bruises, and that defines us and builds the bicep. What's really interesting is along the way, you become really cognizant of like how you're spending your time, who you're spending it with, how you're building your companies, and then you start to really get into the trenches of understanding, oh, okay, if I don't sleep for 6, 7, 8 hours a night, it affects my cognition. If I don't eat really properly, this sounds like basic shit, so stay with me, because you'll argue with me like, who doesn't know that you need 8 hours of sleep? Entrepreneurs. Who doesn't know that you need to eat really healthy and clean and maybe 3 times a day, not just once a week? Entrepreneurs. And when you're really starting out on this journey, and maybe that's not many of you, but maybe that's even just one of you, and I'll tell you this, that the moment I kind of got to the point in my life where I started to look at entrepreneurship, the art of entrepreneurship, even though that sounds so fucking cliche, I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna own that. There's a sense that I am the output of my company, my product, the people in it, what we produce, what we underproduce, what we do, what we don't do, everything about it. We have to stand behind that. We have to stand in front of it. We have to stand beside it. And so if you're not actually like paying attention to like how you're showing up in your everyday to your product or your company or whatever, you fail terribly. And you can actually fail also when you do all these things right. You can sleep 8 hours every day. You can take your B12 in the morning. You can take your D3. You can go for 6 walks throughout the day. But you know what? Guess what? Guess which person is a lot more happy and maybe more sound of mind and maybe have more joy in your bones for doing it while failing or succeeding or a little bit of both, because that's life. There's some failure and some success. Then you got the yin and the yang in pretty much every waking moment. So I say, figure out not what I'm saying, not what somebody else is saying, but maybe just start picking out like, oh, if I can figure out how I can be the absolute clearest, best version of myself, then I can show up in my life and in my work a little bit better every day. And that I really, truly, honest to God, whatever that means for you, believe that that is actually the goal worth strengthening. That is the resilience. That is the endurance worth all of the learnings. I wrote the other day that we're either learning or we're winning. There's just no such thing as failure, right? You were telling your kids. I just took a quick left turn because I'm ADHD and my mind just did that. Sorry. But yeah. And I wanted to leave you with one more nugget, which is, I think a lot of us get obsessed about failure, and especially if you happen to be feeling a semblance of that right now, maybe something's not working out. Maybe something is actually like quite literally on a technical level like failing. Could be a product, could be you, could be your team, could be something that you want to opt out of, could be that you feel stuck, whatever. Go back to the kind of basics of I'm either learning or I'm winning. I'm rarely doing both at the same time. So if it's hard, you're learning. And if you're winning, you're winning. Yes, you learn in those instances, but you're either doing one or the other. So I hope that's valuable.
That's great. Thank you. Good parting words, Lizelle. Thank you. And thank you both. I feel like everyone's been really vulnerable on this stage today, and thank you for sharing your stories.